Really quick, can you hear the lawnmower in the background?
No.
Okay, good. Because as we were just talking about the minute I press record, I don't know who's doing it, and I was like, "Dear Lord." Just want to make sure you couldn't hear it. Awesome. So with that, you that kind of led you into Romo GIS. So you have some activism. You have a lot of activism background, and that kind of influenced. I would imagine Romo GIS. Tell us how that got started. How did you start that company?
So then after being at Columbia and I kind of had that first exposure, I then went to proceed to the University of Michigan, and that's where I got my master's degree. And while I was at University of Michigan, with already that background in GIS, I came in and I was starting to teach some of the GIS courses. And in my first year, and in that first year, I realized, it was very academic, very like, okay, here, follow the rules, push the buttons. Here's how you make a map. And that just didn't suffice for me. I realized that this was such a powerful tool and that it wasn't, at least in the educational spaces, wasn't being articulated as such. It was like, all right, let's make some zoning maps, let's make some bike routes. And that's great. Again, coming from the planning perspective, I recognize those things are important. But I wanted to be more innovative. And so I started hosting some workshops, some like office hours where I taught students about a bunch of different GIS. So we had like forums on participatory GIS and citizen science, and what does that mean for community members to take part in the process of this technology? Because again, coming from marginalized or communities that are underrepresented in the tech space, a lot of times folks don't have access to those resources or know how to utilize those resources to the fullest of their capacity. And so when there's not enough access to education to understand how to use those resources, but then there's also a great opportunity when those resources like GIS are utilized. I just saw a real opening. I was like, yo, this is what we need to do. Like, we need to teach our community members how to leverage this, whether it's for voting, whether it's for access to transportation, where is childcare located, like very basic needs, right? How do we integrate this into that? For me, while at the University of Michigan, I was like, all right, we're going to found a company. I filed my paperwork. I was still a student there. And during that time, that's when I started to pick up on some grants, and we did some work with some PhD students that I some PhD folks that I know, who we did some work in Flint, Michigan. And of course, right, we dropped right in and we saw a need for understanding what the physical environment, what the ecosystem looked like and how it was damaging communities of color in particular. And so what we did was help knock on doors, see what people needed, but also mapped where the water lines were and where were the contaminated water lines and those kind of things. And so with that project, it kind of started to just snowball from there. We did work on toxic hazards near school. We put a index together. It's called My Environment, that was published in a public health journal. And for me, that was the first time that I started to see GIS like in the public health side of things, because in the My Environment map, we looked at communities that were vulnerable to extreme weather events and extreme heat events. And of course, it was a lot of times the lower income communities, predominantly communities of color. And so again, we keep analyzing things and finding the same stuff over and over again. And then in the same way where things fell short, where we weren't articulating how to leverage GIS the appropriate way to the community, when it was leveraged in the academic spheres, that's where it stopped. It was like, okay, we produced a paper, that's it. Okay, we did our research, the grant's over. I'm like, no, that's not good enough. Like, we need to bridge these two gaps, and we need to make sure that the academic folks who are able to do this work are being able to put it in the hands of the community folks. Or that's where I said, or we need to just teach our folks how to use this work. And so a lot of what I've done since then I mean, I'm proud to say that I've probably trained over like 2,000 people in GIS, from high school students to community leaders to nonprofit organizations. And for me, it's just about building up those skills, because as a community organizer, I know voting is a tool, canvassing is a tool. All of these things are tools, but what we aren't talking about are the technical tools that we also could be using to advance our communities. And so for me, GIS, like a lot of these other things, was just another tool in our toolkit that we should be utilizing to help improve quality of life.